Welcome to the Deconstructed Woman podcast, a podcast about breaking down barriers between women, exploring and sharing perspectives of each individual woman's experience, and discovering what we have in common and what makes us different. Hosted by Elisa Marie and Jojy. So welcome back to the Deconstructed Woman podcast. This week, we decided to talk about something that I honestly tried to encompass when raising my children, but I think that it came out a little bit different than I anticipated. And it's about gender neutral parenting. I think and Jojy, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in the more recent generations, we're seeing this push for more gender neutral approaches to parenting. And so I know for me, when I was having my daughter, which was now about 8 years ago, at my baby shower, I mean, there was still, like, I think everybody knew it was a girl. And so, the cupcakes were pink and things like that. But the actual things that I had on my registry, like the baby nursery decor, was all gender neutral. I had picked the theme teddy bears. And so everything was gender neutral because I was going to raise my kid to kind of find her own way in the world, and I didn't want to unduly influence her. And so that was my plan. And quite frankly, from the day she was born, she was in pink dresses and pink bows. And I can't really tell you why that happened, but I can tell you that that was just what occurred. And so as much as I had the forethought of I wanted her to be gender neutral, she was not. And none of my kids have up until this point been. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts and what your experiences were, and kind of meld that with mine to kind of gender neutral parenting.
Sure. My daughter, my one and only, is a girl. And so back when I was pregnant, probably in the mid 90s, I think that there was more attention given to the sex of your child, and then decorating and everything the way that you felt, or you catered to, if it was a boy or a girl, more so than in the later, like the subsequent generations. And I agree with you on that. I will, though, say that for my nursery room, I mean, I really love jewel tones. And so the baby room was actually jewel tones, and it really tried to put together something more of our personalities as parents. And so it probably wasn't a traditional baby room. My daughter's father was lifting weights and working out a lot, so the wallpaper in the center of her room was little animals working out. And so that was really to, bring my husband, her father, into the process at that time and get him as excited about being pregnant, and make him feel a part of it. But so jewel tones versus like pinks and blues. But at the same time, I have noticed that in the last 10 years, I think families who I think we've seen lots of different things. I think there was, a phase where people went the way they didn't want to know the sex of the child. And so there was lots of gender neutral colors and things like that chosen because they wanted to be surprised. Now, I think in the last 5 years, you've got gender reveal parties, which is the opposite of that, and a lot of party planning around the spectacular, revealing of what the gender is, and all the activities that go along with that. And so I think we've seen sort of swings back and forth. But I also want to say that what we're talking about is focusing on raising children and exposing them to not one specific or boy behaviors or girl behaviors, and keeping that very rigid. I think that as I've been talking to some of my friends about this topic, I think there's some confusion about gender fluidity, and that's not what we're talking about. I just want to be clear about that. What we're talking about is gender neutral parenting and allowing our children to lead us in what they're interested in, what they like to do, and us following their lead. Do you agree with that definition or the distinction I'm making, Lissa?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that, I think that it is two separate concepts. But I think that there is maybe some some motivation behind some parents to want to say, I'm going to, I'm not going to dress my kids in pink or blues because I want them to have gender fluidity. But again, I agree that's not necessarily what we're discussing today. What we're talking about is, like you said, just kind of giving them, I think that it's really maybe a pushback on the societal concept of girls play with dolls and boys play with trucks. And that concept that I think has kind of been, I don't know if I would say pushed away, but it's been kind of rejected in some ways from some individuals. Some parents have said, I don't want my child to, my son to play with dolls, or I don't want my daughter to play with trucks. And so then kind of flipping that script and saying, no, my kid can play with whatever they want. And I think that, I have just more recently had friends who, the husbands were very offended if the little boy picked up a baby doll. And it's like, well, that's okay. Like, it's not, there's no, not that I know of, any scientific negative consequence for that. But I think that it feeds into those stereotypical roles of how we raise children, and what, if a little boy plays with a doll, is he then going to, I think we could probably see how that's going to go, the fear that he's going to turn out a certain way. And I think that that's where some parents are saying, we, whatever our child, whatever their sexuality or their sexual orientation or whatever, that doesn't matter. We're just going to create this gender neutral environment and see how it goes.
Right, I agree. And I think that that's what is most important. I think part of my influence early on with my daughter was that I wanted her to know that she was going to have all the same opportunities that if I had had a son would have had. So, I'm not going to limit her dreaming big or thinking about, if she wanted to be an engineer, or if she wanted to be in construction, or if she wanted to be an architect. All of that was great. And in my mind, that ties into something we've talked about before, which is STEM careers for girls, and really my raising my daughter during that time, where it was like, yes, girls should be exposed to all the same things. Let's not limit the messages we give our children because they are a boy or because they are a girl. And I have to say, I think that boys have it harder in this in this conversation because I do. There's a lot of literature that says that boys at a certain age do play or are attracted to doll-like figures and things like that. But I do know that there are fathers that get somewhat upset if they see kids, their sons playing too much with a doll, or however, whatever too much is. I'm not really sure, but you know nobody gives girls any kind of grief if they see girls playing with trucks, or building people out of Legos. Or And so here I think there is sort of a gender difference in the way that we we encourage our daughters to play with all toys, but then we might actually limit our sons in playing with things that are considered more feminine. Now, so, since you have one of each, how have you seen that ever play out in your situation, or do you sort of fight against that? Do you and your husband sort of have the same opinion about the way that kids are, or is it just sort of a free for all, and all the toys are available, and whoever grabs the toy can play with it? What happens? How do things go down at your house?
Yeah, so I would say that it's the last one. Like, we have a playroom, and there's toys, there's, trucks and cars and things, but there's also a Barbie house. And really, when I watch the two older ones, cuz my youngest is 1, so she's out of the playroom because she has her own play place that's has really baby proofed area for her. But in the playroom, they really play with whatever. And it's interesting to watch them play because they don't have any restrictions. They can, they have a kitchen where they make food. And I think that's maybe, kind of a neutral toy. But, they may play with the Barbie dolls, they may play with the trucks and the cars. And they really have no concept of oh, this is a boy's toy versus a girl's toy. But I will say that my son has been gifted the trucks and the trains and those sorts of things, and my daughter was gifted the Barbie house. So, if we ask them, well, whose trucks and trains? Oh, well, those are my sons. That's what they would say. But they don't have any concept of, oh, that's one or the other, so I won't play with it. And so, and as you were talking, I'm going to go back for a minute because I'm reading this book called Scream Free Parenting. And they were talking about how, as parents, we shouldn't label our children. So sometimes people say, oh, he's a mama's boy or it's daddy's girl. And those sorts of labels also kind of feed into certain characteristics that we say. And so, I think that also plays into the verbiage that we use towards our children may also drive them in a certain way versus another. And that was something that just kind of popped into my head because I was thinking of how I try to watch how I say things. And I think that some of that is, again, kind of trying to not pigeonhole them into one particular space. But at the same time, it cracks me up when, I don't dress my two older kids, they dress themselves. And they will come down, and my daughter will be in like a pink shirt and pink pants, and my son will come down in a blue shirt and blue jeans. And it always cracks me up when we go out because, again, like that, they just naturally do that. There's no one way about it. I think to answer your question, my husband and I are on the pretty much the same about this. He does prefer to kind of be more rough housing with my son than our daughters, but I don't think that he necessarily says, oh, this or he can't do this. And again, they kind of just play with whatever's down there. So if they want to play with the dolls and, do something with them, I don't think there's any discouragement on our part.
Yeah, I think that having, if you're lucky enough to have one of each, and then you have toys, you sort of have the toys that cover the gamut of boy and girl, then I think they do have a lot of ability to self-select what they want to play with. And I think in that situation, I think it's harder for a parent to be like, no, you can't play with that. That's your brother's toy. I don't foresee that happening a whole lot. But I do think that if you have, two girls or two boys, then you're going to have how much, if you have two boys, how many, say, more popularly associated with girls are going to show up in that household. Unless parents are gifting them and that parent is willing to receive those toys and bring them into their house, I don't think that would be naturally occur because your friends, the grandparents, they're going to buy sort of what is gender specific, not gender neutral. And so I think that as parents, we're constantly sort of fighting the rest of the world to keep our children's environment broad and not narrow, because I think society will do that for them anyway. And we have to really let them know that no, there's this full expression of, what you want to play with, and don't decide, at 4 what you're going to play with for the rest of your life, right? Like be open and try out different things. And I think that's a good metaphor for development and growth. I mean, everybody has to try on something for fit and see how it is. And you keep what works for you and you let go of things that don't work for you. And I think that's a good, habit to develop when you're parenting your kids, because you really want it to be their choice, and let them realize as a matter of what they like and dislike and eliminate and keep. And I mean, it's to me, I guess we're talking, I'm going from a small specific topic to sort of a broader parenting style. But I think that works. I mean, I think that's really important. And we have to fight the urge to fall into different. I never would have connected what you said about like a mama's boy and how does that tie into this topic, because now that you said it, I'm like, yeah, of course, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? You put that on your child is going to live up to that somehow or other, or you're going to perceive them doing it. And so how do you really stop using some of the phrases that really end up, like residue on children, right? I mean, they really should have not any of those put on them. So that's really interesting. I mean, quickly, I mean, do you have any comments about that? I mean, how did they tie those two together? I'm so curious about that.
Yeah, and I have to go back because I don't remember exactly the link. I just, it stuck with me because it was one of those things where, my everyone says my son's a mama's boy. And I'm fine with it. I don't have a problem with it because he's my only boy. And it goes back to when I talk to some of my friends, they say, I have a very different relationship with my son and my daughter. And again, I don't know if that is, you know, biological or something like that. It just seems that I have a different relationship with him than my daughters in a lot of ways. Although I have different relationships with each of them individually because they have their own personalities and I do different things with them. But I can't remember exactly the link as far as why that was. I wouldn't say it was considered negative, but why they were saying, you shouldn't label it. I think that really the concept was like child not labeling their personality characteristics before they have fully developed. And instead of like, oh, that child's lazy or that child is a hard worker, like moving away from these characteristics or these categories for your children and instead just kind of allowing them to be who they are. And that was part of the concept. I can't remember how it fit into the parenting because the book is about scream free parenting and it's really about lessening our anxiety, because that's typically what the screaming is coming from, and really allowing the child to be who they are. And
Well, I mean, the one thing that resonates with me, sorry to have cut you off there, is really the idea of judgment. Like when I hear a kid is lazy or this, it's a judgment. And I think that when you start judging your child's behavior, then that child, that becomes their identity in some way. And that's where I think it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Whereas I think the hardest thing as a parent to do is not to read into anything, right? And to just be able to, almost be matter of fact, like describe the behavior and not the child. Not easy to do when you're raising your child and you're putting all this time and effort into it. But at the same time, I do feel like, the one time that they do something, if you judge them on it and then that becomes the persona you project on that child, you really haven't given the child the opportunity to prove you right or wrong. You've sort of already labeled them that way. And so I can definitely see why they would do that. And as a parent, if that behavior that you've labeled them creates anxiety for you, then that is going to be a trigger point for you as a parent. And none of us are perfect, and we always we can fall into those behaviors. But I think it's a good cautionary tale to stay away from that and to almost as a parent record the behaviors of your child and not read into that too much, because I can guarantee you next week, next month, next year, they will not be the same.
yeah, that's exactly what it was. Thank you. You made the link because I was like, yeah, we're going somewhere with this, and I'm not sure exactly where where we're going. But yeah, that was exactly what they were talking about. And especially if you label a child as they're lazy, for instance, and so you say like my kid's lazy, they never do anything, then your frustration with them is the result of that judgment, and then that can feed into how you interact with them. So I think that it kind of all comes full circle because again, there's a lot of I don't think it's just generationally that people are trying to quote unquote create gender neutral children. I think that we're trying to create an environment that maybe doesn't have judgment, and I think that that's a good way of categorizing it. And it's something that again, I don't know that anybody does it that I can say definitively, but I do try to encourage, because we were talking about STEM, like, science experiments for both children. And really, let's talk about math and just like creating a fostering environment of opening up doors so that they don't, kind of what you were saying with your daughter, like, so they don't feel like they're pigeonholed into avenue because I'm a boy or a girl. It's just there's opportunities out there and I have to take them.
Well, I will tell you that if we end this conversation, and the conclusion is that gender neutral parenting leads to judgment free parenting, I'm all about it. That's fantastic because I think ultimately that is such a benefit for us as parents and the children that we raise, because children that are raised that way are really allowed to blossom into whatever they want, and they become the best expression of themselves. So I love the way that we're ending this conversation, Lisa. I feel like, wow, that is like check all the boxes. That's wonderful. I'm glad. I don't know if we intended to get there, but the conversation naturally drew us that way, and I feel really good about the way that ended. That we're ending on a high note.
Well, and I think that, we probably curious to hear from our listeners, but I wonder how many parents out there are like, yeah, that's what I was trying to do, but I didn't call it gender neutral. I just tried to be a maybe judgment free or just a good parent in general. But I think that it's interesting that, again, generationally, there's, we were both kind of aiming for the same thing. I'm still raising mine. So there's still time will tell how they end up maybe 10, 15 years from now. But, both of us were really just encouraging them to be themselves. And I think that that's something that probably didn't happen in just like the last 10, 15, 20 years. That's probably something that parents have been trying to strive for. But maybe, society didn't allow for that in the past. Or maybe, we had just, you don't do that. You don't give, a boy a doll or whatever it was that, was the mentality before. And now there's some easement on that as we really have, evolved hopefully as a species. So I think that that's, it's interesting to see that that's what we're all trying in some ways to aim for. And I think that it, again, time will tell what that looks like for generations to come. But I think that I'm gonna start calling myself a judgment free parent. So that's where we're gonna end that.
Absolutely. Another great episode of The Deconstructed Woman, and looking at another topic that's very close to both of our hearts. Just want to remind our listeners that we'd love to hear from you. And we've heard some great comments, and we take all the feedback you give us and try to become better. And we do take it to heart. Please drop us a note at thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com. And we'd love to hear from you. And please tune in next time for another episode with Elisa Marie and Jojy. Until next time, we'll sign off for now. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, The Deconstructed Woman. If you liked this podcast, please share it with your friends, rate this episode, or subscribe to be notified of all new content. We want to hear from you, our listener. Do you have thoughts on the discussions we're having? Want to share topic suggestions, or want to join us for a topic that you're passionate about? Contact us at our email address, thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com.